Where dreams begin, Keanu Reeves stood by the window of the airplane watching the clouds drift slowly beneath him. Toronto was only a few minutes away. For years, he had traveled the world, filmed stories, met thousands of people, and lived countless moments under bright lights. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't returning as a celebrity. He was returning as a man who wanted to show someone special where his dreams had begun. Beside him sat Sandra Bullock. Her eyes were calm but curious, trying to read the quiet in his face. She had worked with him, laughed with him, shared long conversations about life, pain, and purpose. Yet even after all these years, there were places inside him she had never seen. And Toronto, he had once told her, held both his roots and his ghosts. As the plane began to descend, the city came into view. Silver towers, calm lakes, and long streets lined with autumn trees. Keanu smiled faintly. The sight always brought him back to simpler days. Days when he believed in dreams, even when the world didn't believe in him. He whispered softly, almost to himself. This is where everything started. Sandra turned to him and asked, "Are you ready?" He looked at her and said quietly, "I think I have been ready for a long time. I just didn't know how much I needed to come back." The airport was crowded but peaceful. Fans recognized him, yet he moved gently through them, never rushing, never ignoring. He stopped for photos, thanked people for kindness, and smiled at children who stared at him in awe. Sandra noticed how he treated everyone as if they mattered equally. No cameras, no noise, just genuine warmth. She had seen actors act humble before, but this was different. This was real. When they stepped outside, the cold Toronto air brushed their faces. The sky was a soft gray, and a quiet drizzle had started to fall. Keanu pulled out an old cap, the same one he had worn years ago when he used to walk these streets alone. Sandra smiled and said, "You still have that thing?" He nodded. "It reminds me of the kid who believed he could make something of his life." Their car drove through familiar streets. Keanu pointed out places that once held his laughter and his struggles. The old movie theater where he had worked part-time. The bookstore where he used to hide between aisles and write about philosophy and art. And the small apartment where he lived when he was just trying to survive. Every corner carried a memory. Every street carried a lesson. As they passed a neighborhood park, he asked the driver to stop. They stepped out and walked under tall maple trees. The air smelled of rain and earth. Children were playing in the distance. Sandra could see something change in his eyes, a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. "This," he said softly, "was where I used to come when life felt too heavy. I would sit on that bench and watch the sky. I didn't know how to fix anything, but I knew if I kept breathing, something good might come." Sandra sat beside him on the same bench. "And did it?" she asked gently. He smiled, his eyes misty. "It did, just not in the way I expected." For a while, they sat in silence. A soft wind moved the leaves around their feet. There was no crowd here, no noise, only the quiet sound of two people who understood each other without words. Sandra looked at him and saw not the actor, not the icon, but the boy who had walked through pain and still found kindness in his heart. As the day went on, they visited the high school he had attended. The walls were older, but the spirit was the same. A few teachers remembered him, how quiet he was, how often he helped others, how he once fixed a classmate's bike even though his own was broken. One teacher said, "He always carried something heavy in his eyes, but he never let it turn into anger. He always chose gentleness." Sandra listened, touched by every story. She realized that behind every success there are years of unseen effort, silent nights, and quiet courage. Keanu had lived through all of that, and yet he had remained human, humble, and kind. Later that evening, they walked near the Con Tower, the iconic symbol of Toronto. The tower glowed softly under the fading sky. Keanu stopped and looked up at it, his reflection shimmering on the wet ground. "When I was young," he said, "I used to come here and look up. I told myself that one day, if I ever made it, I would bring someone here, not to show how far I had come, but to remember where it all began." Sandra looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "And you brought me." He turned to her slowly, his expression calm yet full of emotion. "Yes, because you've seen the man the world knows. But I wanted you to meet the boy he used to be." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the city filled the space between them, the soft hum of cars, the laughter of people, the echo of a distant song. And then Sandra said something that stayed in his heart. "You didn't lose him, Keanu. You just grew around him." He smiled. But before he could reply, a voice called out behind them. An older man approached, his face familiar yet worn by time. Keanu froze, his eyes widening. Sandra looked between them, sensing something unspoken. "Keanu," the man said quietly, "you still remember me?" Keanu's lips parted, his voice caught between disbelief and memory. "Mr. Donovan, my first drama teacher." The man smiled, his eyes bright. "You were the quietest one in the class, but you had fire in your eyes." "I always knew you'd make it." Keanu stepped forward and hugged him tightly. It was a long, quiet embrace, one that carried years of gratitude and unspoken stories. Sandra felt tears gather in her eyes as she watched them. She knew this was more than a reunion. It was closure. Mr. Donovan looked at Sandra and said kindly, "You're lucky to know him. He's one of the few who never let fame change his heart." They talked for a while, remembering small moments, small failures, small victories. When Mr. Donovan finally left, Keanu stood still, staring at the tower again. "Life is strange," he said softly. "It takes you far away just to bring you back." The night settled over Toronto like a soft blanket. Streetlights shimmered and the sound of rain returned. Sandra and Keanu walked side by side without speaking. It wasn't silence of emptiness, but of peace. Yet deep inside, something stirred. Keanu had felt it since morning, something incomplete, something unresolved. There was one more place he needed to go, one last truth he had never faced. As they reached the hotel, Sandra noticed the change in his tone. He was quieter now, distant in thought. When she asked if he was okay, he simply said, "There's someone I need to see tomorrow." She didn't press further. She only nodded, trusting that whatever it was, it mattered deeply to him. But that night, as Keanu stood by the window of his hotel room, watching the city lights blink beneath the rain, a single tear rolled down his face. He whispered to himself, "After all these years, maybe it's time," and far away, in a quiet part of the city, an old woman turned off her lamp, unaware that the boy she had once cared for was finally coming home. The woman who waited, the morning light spread softly over Toronto, painting the skyline in pale gold. The city seemed slower than usual, quieter, as if it knew something meaningful was about to unfold. Keanu woke early, long before the sun was fully up. He didn't sleep much that night. His mind kept replaying old memories, the sound of a woman's voice, the scent of home-cooked food, the warmth of hands that once held his when he was still learning what kindness meant. He stood by the window, watching the streets below, his reflection faint in the glass. Behind him, Sandra slowly stirred awake. She noticed the heaviness in his silence, the way his shoulders seemed burdened by invisible weight. "You didn't sleep?" she said softly, her voice still hushed from rest. "No," he replied without turning. "I kept thinking about her." She sat up, sensing the depth in his words. "Her?" Keanu turned finally, his eyes thoughtful. "My neighbor from when I was a kid, Mrs. Ramirez. She was the one who looked after me when things were falling apart, when my mom had to work late, when I came home from school with nothing but questions about life." There was a gentleness in his tone that Sandra hadn't heard before. He wasn't just remembering a person. He was remembering safety, care, and the one piece of his childhood that had kept him whole. "She used to make soup when I was sick," he said quietly. "She didn't have much, but she gave everything. And then one day I just left. I went to chase my dream, and I never came back to thank her." Sandra listened carefully. "Do you know where she is now?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. I looked her up last night. She still lives in the same place. Same small house with the blue door." He paused, taking a breath. "I want to see her. I need to." By mid-morning, they were driving through old residential streets lined with trees and memories. Toronto had changed in many ways, but some corners still carried the same scent of childhood. The bakery that smelled like sugar and cinnamon, the little grocery shop with the same faded red sign, and the narrow sidewalks where bicycles once raced without fear. The car stopped in front of a modest house with a weathered blue door and flower pots along the steps. Sandra stayed silent, giving him space. Keanu stood there for a long time before moving forward. His heartbeat felt louder than the city itself. He knocked softly. No answer at first. He knocked again. And then the door opened. An elderly woman with silver hair and deep, kind eyes stood before him. Her hands trembled slightly, but her smile was warm and patient. "Yes?" she said gently. Keanu hesitated, his voice breaking. "Mrs. Ramirez." "It's me." For a moment she looked at him confused. Then her eyes widened. Her hand rose to her chest. "Oh my, Keanu, is it really you?" He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "It's me. It's been a long time." She stepped forward and placed her trembling hand on his cheek, as if making sure he was real. "Look at you. You grew up just like I thought you would. You always had that light in you." He couldn't speak. He just hugged her, holding her tightly, as though he was holding on to all the years he had lost. Sandra stood a few steps away, watching the scene quietly. Her eyes softened. She could feel the purity of the moment, the reunion of two souls bound not by blood, but by love and memory. Mrs. Ramirez led them inside. The small house smelled of baked bread and coffee. Family pictures covered the walls, some new, some faded with time. "I watch your movies sometimes," she said with a proud smile. "I tell my neighbors, that boy used to sit on my porch and talk about dreams. They laugh and don't believe me." Keanu chuckled softly through his tears. "You were the first person who made me believe those dreams were possible." They sat around the table, sipping tea. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with stories and laughter. Yet beneath the joy, there was also something unspoken, a question lingering between the past and the present. Mrs. Ramirez looked at him carefully. "I heard about the losses you've faced, Keanu. I prayed for you every night." His smile faded slightly. "Thank you. I didn't handle them well at first. I thought pain was something to hide. But you once told me, pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you real." I never forgot that. The woman's eyes glistened. "You listened. I'm proud of the man you've become. But tell me, my boy, are you happy?" The room went quiet. Sandra glanced at him, waiting for his answer. Keanu looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of the cup. "I think I'm learning to be," he said softly. "For a long time, I thought happiness meant escaping the past. But maybe it's about returning to it, forgiving it, and remembering what mattered." Mrs. Ramirez smiled. "That's wisdom, not fame." After a while, Keanu walked around the small living room. He noticed a dusty old photo frame on the shelf, a picture of him at 16, smiling shyly with a broken bicycle beside him. He laughed. "You kept this?" She nodded. "You fixed that bike for my grandson when no one else would. That was the day I knew you'd grow into a kind man." As they said their goodbyes, she held his hand tightly. "Don't wait another 30 years to visit. And next time, bring me one of those Hollywood stories." He smiled. "I'll bring you something better, a promise," she laughed. "Oh, promises. I'll hold you to it." Back in the car, the city seemed brighter. Keanu sat quietly, lost in thought. Sandra turned to him. "That was beautiful." "Yeah," he said softly. "It reminded me that success means nothing if you forget where kindness lives." As they drove toward the lakeshore, a sense of calm filled the air. The reflection of the skyline shimmered on the water, and the horizon seemed endless. But just as peace began to settle, Keanu's phone buzzed. He looked at it and froze. His expression changed. Calmness turned to confusion, and confusion to worry. "What is it?" Sandra asked. He hesitated, then handed her the phone. On the screen was a message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come back. Some things are better left buried." Sandra frowned. "Who sent this?" Keanu stared out the window, his face unreadable. "I don't know. But someone remembers me, and not in the way I hoped." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The car moved through the streets, but the warmth of the morning had shifted. Something unseen now lingered in the air, a shadow from the past, waiting to be revealed. Keanu's voice finally broke the silence. "There's only one person who would send that." Sandra turned toward him. "Who?" His eyes were distant, almost haunted. "Someone I once called my brother." The brother he left behind, the rain had returned that evening, thin and steady, blurring the lights of Toronto into streaks of gold and silver. From the window of his hotel room, Keanu watched people moving under umbrellas, small stories crossing paths beneath the endless drizzle. But his mind was elsewhere. It was back in the days when he wasn't famous, when he shared a cramped apartment with someone who had once been like family to him. That name echoed in his mind now. Alex Carter. They had met when Keanu was barely out of high school, a quiet dreamer trying to make ends meet. Alex was older by a few years, wild and full of fire, the kind of person who could turn any moment into chaos or laughter. They worked together at a small theater downtown, performing unpaid plays for a handful of people who believed in dreams as much as they did. In those days, they had promised each other that no matter what happened, no fame or failure would come between them. But life, as it often does, tested that promise. When Keanu's career started rising, Alex's began to fall apart. Jealousy mixed with pride, friendship twisted into silence. And then one day, without warning, Alex disappeared. Now, decades later, a message from an unknown number brought that name back like a storm breaking through the calm. Sandra noticed the tension in Keanu's face. She walked up beside him, holding a cup of tea, her voice soft. "You think it's him, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "It has to be. No one else would know the words he used. Some things are better left buried." That's something he said to me the night we stopped talking. "What happened between you two?" Keanu sighed, his eyes distant. He wanted to make a film, a small, independent project. We worked on it together, but when investors came, they wanted my name to lead. He thought I betrayed him when I agreed. I tried to explain that I didn't care about credit, but he never believed me. That night, he told me I had forgotten where I came from. I left thinking he needed time. I never saw him again. He paused. Until now. The next morning, Sandra and Keanu decided to visit the old theater where they had first met. The building still stood, though time had carved cracks along its walls. Faded posters clung to the windows, and the sign above the door read the Rosedale Stage. As they stepped inside, the air smelled of dust and memories. Broken chairs lined the aisles, and sunlight leaked through torn curtains. Keanu walked toward the stage slowly, his footsteps echoing softly. "This was where it all began," he said quietly, "where I learned to fail without shame." He touched the wooden floor as if it were sacred. Alex used to say the stage was like a mirror. It shows who you really are. As they looked around, a shadow moved near the back of the theater. Sandra noticed it first. "Someone's here." Keanu turned sharply. From the darkness, a figure stepped forward, a man in his late 50s, wearing a long coat, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes, sharp and knowing, locked onto Keanu's. "You finally came back," the man said. His voice carried both bitterness and longing. Keanu's breath caught. "Alex!" For a moment, neither of them moved. The years between them felt like walls made of regret. Alex broke the silence first. "You left without a word. You let them turn my dream into your story." Keanu shook his head. "That's not true. I tried to reach out, Alex. I didn't even know what they did until it was too late." Alex laughed bitterly. "Too late. Everything is always too late with you, isn't it? Too late to call, too late to care." Sandra stepped forward gently. "He came back because he still cares. He came back to remember who he was." Alex turned to her. "And who are you? Another famous friend to fix his conscience?" Her eyes softened. "No. I'm just someone who knows the kind of man he is." The words hung in the air, heavy but honest. Keanu took a slow breath. "Alex, I didn't come to fight. I came to say sorry. I should have come sooner." Alex's expression flickered, hurt battling pride. "Sorry doesn't change what happened." "Maybe not," Keanu said quietly. "But it can change what happens next." There was silence again. Only the sound of rain dripping through a crack in the roof filled the room. Finally, Alex sat down in one of the broken chairs. "You know what hurts the most? Not that you became famous. It's that you forgot to tell me you made it. I had to find out from a newspaper." Keanu's voice broke slightly. "I didn't want you to think I'd left you behind. I thought if I reached out, you'd hate me more." Alex looked at him for a long time. "Maybe I would have, Or maybe I needed to hear it from you. For the first time in years, both men stood in the same light, two friends who had loved, lost, and misunderstood each other through silence. Sandra walked toward the exit to give them space, but before she left, she heard Keanu say something that stayed in her mind for the rest of her life. "You were part of every good thing that happened to me," he said softly, "even if you weren't there to see it." Alex didn't reply, but his eyes filled with tears. When they finally stepped out of the theater, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear, painted in soft shades of orange. It felt like a small mercy after years of storm. Sandra asked quietly, "Do you think he forgave you?" Keanu looked up at the sky. "Maybe not yet, but I think he wants to." As they walked along the empty street, Keanu's phone buzzed again. Another message appeared. This time it wasn't a threat. "Meet me tomorrow. There's something you need to know about your father." He stopped in his tracks. His heart pounded in his chest. Sandra looked at him, worried. "What is it?" Keanu handed her the phone, his voice barely a whisper. "That's impossible. My father's been gone for decades." She frowned. "Then who sent this?" He stared ahead, his eyes distant, his voice trembling with confusion and fear. "I don't know," he said softly, "but whoever it is, they know something I don't." The city lights flickered on as darkness fell, and somewhere in the quiet corners of Toronto, someone watched from the shadows, someone who had been waiting for Keanu's return for a very long time. The letter from the past, the city was still sleeping when Keanu woke before dawn. The sky outside his hotel window was painted in shades of blue and gray, like a quiet promise waiting to break. His thoughts had not rested through the night. The message from the unknown number still echoed in his head. "Meet me tomorrow. There's something you need to know about your father." He whispered the words again under his breath, as if saying them out loud would somehow make them less impossible. His father had been gone for many years. Not gone in the sense of distance, but gone from life itself. He had read the news, attended the silence, and buried the guilt. Yet now, someone claimed there was more to the story. When Sandra woke, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. She could see from his stillness that something inside him was changing. "You haven't moved all night," she said gently. "You're thinking about that message, aren't you?" He nodded slowly. "I can't shake the feeling that it means something real. I don't know how, but I need to find out." "Then we find out," she said simply. "You're not alone in this." The address in the message led them to an old industrial part of Toronto, near the edge of the lake. Abandoned warehouses stretched along the road, and the air smelled faintly of rust and rain. It was the kind of place that carried memories no one wanted to keep. As they approached the address, they found a small, weathered cafe tucked between two brick buildings. Its faded sign read Harbor Light. Inside, the lights flickered softly, and only one table was occupied, a man in his 60s with a gray beard and a worn jacket. He looked up as they entered, and a strange recognition passed through his eyes. "You came," he said quietly. Keanu's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The man gestured for them to sit. "My name is Thomas Ellis. I used to work with your father." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Keanu sat slowly, his voice low. "You knew him?" Thomas nodded. "Better than most, and I think it's time you knew the truth about what really happened to him." Keanu leaned forward, his heart racing. "Go on." The man reached into his coat and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed and fragile. The handwriting on it was shaky but familiar. "This letter was meant for you," Thomas said. "Your father wrote it before he disappeared, but he made me promise to give it to you only when you came back to Toronto." Keanu's hands trembled as he took the envelope. His name was written across it in his father's handwriting, something he hadn't seen since childhood. For a moment, he couldn't bring himself to open it. Memories flooded back, his father's voice, deep and steady, teaching him to fix things, to stay humble, to never let the world harden him. And then the distance that grew between them when life pulled them apart. Finally, he unfolded the letter and began to read. "My son, if you are reading this, it means time has done what I could not. It has brought you home. I know I wasn't the father you deserved. I made choices that left scars, not only on myself, but on you. I tried to protect you from the things I did, but maybe in doing so, I only made you feel abandoned. I never stopped watching you, Keanu. Every time I heard your name, I felt both pride and pain. Pride because you became everything I hoped you would. Pain because I wasn't there to see it. There are things you don't know about our family, about why I left and why I couldn't come back. But you deserve to know the truth. Find Thomas. He has the rest. And remember, kindness is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. Love, Dad." The words blurred as Keanu's eyes filled with tears. Sandra placed her hand gently on his arm, grounding him in the moment. What truth was he talking about? She asked softly. Thomas sighed. Your father was involved in something he never told you about. It wasn't crime or scandal. It was loyalty. He worked for a charity organization in the late 70s that uncovered corruption in local funding. When they tried to expose it, people got hurt. He had to disappear to keep others safe, including you. Keanu stared at him, disbelief and grief mixing in his chest. He left to protect me? Yes, Thomas said. He never wanted you to carry his burden. He wanted you to live free of his mistakes. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the faint hum of the cafe filled the silence. Keanu folded the letter carefully, holding it close to his chest. He wasn't running away, Keanu whispered. He was trying to keep me safe. Exactly, Thomas said, and he made me promise to give you this. He handed over a small, silver key with a tag marked Locker 12, Union Station. He left something for you there. I never looked inside. I thought maybe one day you'd come back and find it yourself. Keanu stared at the key, its metal cool against his skin. The weight of it felt like the past reaching out from another lifetime. They thanked Thomas and left the cafe. The rain had stopped, and the city glistened in soft daylight. As they drove toward Union Station, Sandra looked at him and said quietly, Do you realize what this means? Your father wasn't lost, he was guarding something. Keanu nodded. And now it's my turn to finish what he started. Inside the vast hall of Union Station, the sound of footsteps echoed across marble floors. They followed the signs toward the old locker section, now mostly unused. Keanu's hands were shaking as he fit the key into Locker 12. It clicked open. Inside was a single black box wrapped in a faded piece of cloth. He lifted it carefully and opened the lid. Inside were two items: an old pocket watch engraved with the initials RR and a photograph. His father standing beside a group of men and women outside a small community center. On the back of the photo, there was a single line written in his father's handwriting. Truth survives when kindness leads. Beneath the photo, there was something else, a folded newspaper clipping from years ago. The headline read, Local charity whistleblower presumed dead in fire. Keanu's breath caught. He didn't die in that fire, did he? Sandra's eyes widened. Someone wanted people to think he did. Keanu stared at the photograph again, feeling his pulse quicken. Thomas said he was protecting someone. But what if he's still alive? The thought hung in the air like lightning about to strike. And then from behind them, a familiar voice spoke, a voice that froze both of them where they stood. You're closer than you think, my son. Keanu turned around slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. A tall, older man stood in the shadows at the end of the hall. His hair was gray, his face weathered by time, but his eyes, those eyes, were unmistakable. Dad, Keanu whispered, his voice trembling. The man smiled faintly. You found me. The key slipped from Keanu's fingers as his world tilted between disbelief and hope. The man who never left for a long moment, time seemed to stop inside the echoing hall of Union Station. Keanu stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The man in the shadows stepped forward, slow and careful, his expression both fragile and certain. Every step he took felt like the sound of memory itself. You're real, Keanu whispered, his voice trembling. I thought you were gone. His father smiled faintly. That was the idea, my son. I had to make the world believe it. Sandra stood a few feet behind Keanu, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. She had seen him in movies, in quiet interviews, in tears and laughter, but she had never seen him like this. Raw, childlike, caught between grief and wonder. The older man reached out his hand, and for a moment Keanu hesitated. Then he stepped forward and embraced him. It wasn't a dramatic embrace, not one for cameras or movies. It was simple, human, filled with years of absence, forgiveness, and the kind of love that doesn't need words. When they pulled apart, Keanu's voice was barely a whisper. Why did you stay hidden all these years? His father sighed, looking away. Because I had to protect more than just you. There were people involved, good people, who would have been hunted if I surfaced. The fire was the only way to make sure they were safe. But I watched you, Keanu, every success, every heartbreak. I saw you grow into the man I hoped you'd become. You watched me? His father nodded. Always from a distance. I couldn't be there in person, but I never left in spirit. Keanu looked at him, tears burning in his eyes. You should have trusted me. I would have understood. You were too young, the man said gently, and I didn't trust myself to explain it without putting you in danger. They sat together on one of the old benches near the lockers. The noise of the city outside seemed to fade as father and son finally spoke the words they had both kept locked away for decades. You know, his father said softly, the night before the fire I wrote that letter for you. Thomas promised me he would give it to you when the time was right. I never thought it would take this long. Keanu smiled faintly. I read it this morning. Every word felt like a bridge back to you. His father looked at him deeply. You've carried pain, Keanu, but you turned it into something beautiful. I saw the way you treat people, how you live with kindness. You didn't inherit my mistakes. You built your own light. Keanu's throat tightened. Maybe because of you. Maybe because somewhere deep down, I always wanted to make you proud. His father reached out and placed a trembling hand on his son's shoulder. You did, my boy. More than you'll ever know. Sandra turned away slightly, blinking back her own tears. She didn't want to interrupt something sacred, but Keanu looked back at her and gave a small nod as if to say thank you for being here. After a moment, Keanu asked, Where have you been living? Not far, his father said. A small cabin near the outskirts of the city, quiet, peaceful. I stayed hidden, but I always left small signs, donations in your mother's name, letters to people who could reach you if you ever returned. I didn't think you would. Keanu's gaze softened. I almost didn't. But something kept pulling me back. Maybe it was you. His father smiled. Maybe it was time. They decided to drive to the cabin together. The road was long and quiet, stretching through the golden edge of the forest. The world outside felt suspended, like they were moving between past and present at once. The cabin stood beside a still lake, surrounded by tall pines and soft mist. It looked old but cared for, as if time had passed gently here. When they entered, the air smelled of wood, ink, and old books. Photographs lined the shelves, some of Keanu as a boy, others of his father standing beside strangers who looked like community volunteers. On a small table lay a stack of letters tied with twine. His father motioned toward them. These were all meant for you. I wrote one every year. I didn't know if you'd ever read them, but it made me feel close to you. Keanu untied the bundle carefully and opened the first one. The words were simple, written in shaky handwriting. Year 1, you turned 18 today. I hope you still play the guitar. Remember, the strings don't care about fame. They only respond to honesty. He read another. Year 6. I saw your first movie. I couldn't stop smiling. You looked nervous, but that's good. It means you still care. And another. Year 15. The world knows your face, but I still see the boy who used to fix everything around the house just to keep his hands busy. I hope you never lose that heart. Keanu stopped reading, overcome by emotion. Tears streamed down his face. You were with me all along, he whispered. His father nodded. In every way that mattered. For a while, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the sound of rain tapping gently on the roof. Sandra looked around, noticing something strange. A wall covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and photos connected by thin red strings. What is all this? She asked. His father turned toward her, a trace of unease in his eyes. This is what I've been working on. After the fire, the people who tried to stop the corruption vanished. I kept searching, collecting proof, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. I have enough evidence to clear the names of everyone who was blamed, including mine. Keanu looked at him in shock. You've been building this case all these years? His father nodded. I couldn't let the truth die, but I couldn't do it alone either. Now that you're here, maybe we can finally finish it. Sandra stepped closer, reading the names on the board. This is bigger than I thought. His father exhaled slowly. Bigger than any of us, and that's why I stayed hidden. I didn't want anyone to use your fame to find me. Keanu walked to the window, looking out at the calm lake. So what happens now? His father's voice lowered. Now we tell the truth, but we must be careful. There are still people who don't want this story to come out. You mean the people who tried to stop you before? Yes, his father said quietly. And they'll try again if they know you're involved. A sharp knock suddenly broke the silence. All three of them froze. Sandra's eyes darted to the door. Did you tell anyone we were coming here? His father shook his head slowly. No one. The knock came again, louder this time, firmer. Keanu's heart pounded. Who would know we're here? His father glanced toward the back of the cabin. There's another way out through the kitchen door. If anything happens, you and Sandra leave. Promise me? Keanu stared at him. I'm not leaving you again. Before his father could answer, the door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, hooded, silent, face hidden. For a brief second, the world felt like it was holding its breath. Then the voice spoke, deep and cold. You should have stayed gone, both of you. The truth that set them free, the cabin filled with silence so deep it felt like the air itself refused to move. Keanu's heartbeat echoed in his ears. Beside him, Sandra's hand tightened around his arm. His father stood motionless near the table, his eyes locked on the hooded figure at the door. Who are you? Keanu demanded, his voice steady but his pulse racing. The stranger took one slow step inside, pulling down the hood. The dim light revealed an older man, sharp eyes beneath heavy brows. His voice was calm but cold. "You don't remember me, but your father does." Keanu turned toward his father, searching his face. The old man's expression darkened with recognition. "Roberts," he said quietly, "I thought you were gone." "You thought wrong," Roberts replied. "You should have stayed buried with the others." Sandra's breath caught. "What is he talking about?" Keanu's father spoke carefully, his voice low. "He was one of the men who ran the charity's funding project. He was part of the reason I had to disappear. When we found proof of the corruption, he burned everything. I thought he died in the fire too." Roberts smiled thinly. "You didn't think I'd let you ruin my name, did you? You ran, and I let you because as long as you stayed hidden, the truth stayed hidden too. But now," he looked at Keanu, "you brought the spotlight back." Keanu took a step forward. "You've lived all these years knowing you destroyed good people's lives." Robert's smirk faded. "The world moves on, boy. No one cares about old scandals. But if you start talking, if your father starts talking, people will start digging again. And that's bad for both of you." Keanu's father straightened, his old strength returning. "I don't care what happens to me. The truth has waited long enough." Roberts took another step forward, his tone turning hard. "Think about what you're doing. Your son's life is built on peace, on fame. Do you want to drag that into the dirt?" Keanu's voice broke through the tension. "If telling the truth is dirt, then I'll live in it proudly." For a brief second, no one moved. The fire crackled softly in the corner. Then Roberts sighed, as if realizing he had already lost. "You really are your father's son," he said quietly. "Foolish and stubborn." He turned toward the door, but before he left, he looked back. "Just remember, truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it burns everything you love." And then he was gone, disappearing into the mist like a shadow retreating from light. The three of them stood in the quiet aftermath, breathing heavily. The cabin felt different now, lighter, yet filled with a new weight of decision. Sandra finally spoke. "What do we do now?" Keanu's father looked at the board covered in clippings and documents. "We finish it. I have enough evidence here to prove what happened, but I can't go to the authorities alone. They won't believe me after all these years." Keanu nodded. "They'll believe me. We'll bring everything out together." His father looked at him with pride. "You'd risk your name for this?" "For the truth," Keanu said softly. "And for you." That night they gathered every document, every letter, every photograph. Sandra recorded the files, making sure nothing could be erased. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the cabin roof like a drum of destiny. By morning, they were ready. The next day, they went to the press. The story broke slowly at first, then spread like wildfire. Old wounds reopened, old names resurfaced, and the truth that had been buried for decades finally came to light. People learned that the fire had been no accident, that men like Roberts had stolen funds meant for children and families, and that one man, Keanu's father, had risked everything to stop them. The media tried to turn it into a spectacle, but Keanu refused to let it become entertainment. Every time a reporter asked for drama, he brought them back to compassion. "This isn't about revenge," he said in one interview. "It's about redemption. It's about remembering that doing the right thing doesn't always give you peace, but it gives you purpose." The story inspired millions. Old volunteers came forward with memories and photos. The families who had suffered finally received justice. And as for Roberts, he vanished again, this time into silence, his name forever tied to the truth he tried to bury. Months passed. The city of Toronto felt different now for Keanu. It was no longer just the place where he grew up. It was where his story had come full circle, where he found his past, his father, and his peace. One quiet evening, he and Sandra walked by the lake near his father's cabin. The water shimmered in golden light, and birds traced slow paths across the sky. "You know," Sandra said softly, "when we came here, I thought we were just visiting your childhood. I didn't know we were going to find everything you lost." Keanu smiled faintly. "I didn't know either. Sometimes life hides the truth until we're ready to face it." She looked at him with warmth. "Are you ready now?" He nodded. "For the first time, yes." Behind them, his father stood by the porch, watching them with quiet pride. His hair glowed silver in the evening sun, and for the first time in years, he looked at peace. He walked toward them slowly. "You both gave me something I thought I'd never have again, a second chance." Keanu smiled. "You earned it, Dad. You never stopped believing in the right thing." His father looked at the lake, his eyes soft. "You know what I've learned after all these years? Truth doesn't destroy families, it rebuilds them." The three of them stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon. The water caught the last light of day, turning gold and silver at once. The world felt quiet again, not because nothing was left to say, but because everything had finally been said. Sandra placed her hand over Keanu's. "So, what now?" Keanu looked at the sky, then at the reflection of the city lights in the lake. "Now we live, now we keep the promise." "What promise?" she asked. He smiled. "The one I made to Mrs. Ramirez to bring her a story worth telling," she laughed softly. "You think this one's enough?" He looked back at the cabin, at the man who had once disappeared and the truth that had once been hidden, and said quietly, "It's the only one that ever mattered." The wind picked up gently, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Keanu closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just Keanu Reeves the actor. He was Keanu Reeves the son, the dreamer, the boy from Toronto who finally came home.